planetarium director here. So wherever he would be working, he would have done the same things that he did here at the planetarium. So knowing him pretty well, I'm sure that this is what he would have done. So there will be a brief introduction to his work here at the planetarium and his scientific research outside, and also some kind of a bridging between his professional research life and also uh, the latter half of his life when he spent much time and effort on cementing science education on a firm footing at the planetarium. Though it is by non-formal methods, it has come to be recognized uh, very seriously by all universities all over the world. So let me begin with this particular slide, which is introducing the topic. The Black Hole Man of India, born on 6th March. He crossed the event horizon on the 16th January 2017. And this particular photograph is very, very significant because to the best of my knowledge, this was his last public appearance before he was hospitalized with a certain respiratory infection, to which he yielded finally after a long battle. So fighting battle was not new to him. He fought many battles, some of which at least I will have opportunity to share with you. But then this is one battle which we all wish he would have won, like he did many other times. So on the 16th of January, he crossed the event horizon in the physical form, but he continues to be around with us in spirit and soul, as I told you. Now, this is the last public appearance as far as I know, and this happened at Malleshwaram Education Society, MES College. This occasion was after the first direct detection of gravitational waves. So they had arranged a program where Professor C.V. Vishveshwara interacted with undergraduate students of MES College, and wherein he shared, in addition to his experiences about gravitational wave research in general, and in particular one of the seminal papers that he wrote, which became the cornerstone in the direct detection. He also discussed a lot of things about science education, and also his involvement in the planetarium here in the context of science education. So I would request people who might be interested in picking up his wise thoughts about science education to search on the internet for this particular talk. There are a number of video bits which are available, and in his inimitable, witty, humorous style, he talks on a number of serious issues that are the bane of today's science education. So I would not go into those details. I would request you to look up on the internet. So this is Professor C.V. Vishveshwara, born on 6th March, and he lived up to 16th of January 2017. And so here is Professor C.V. Vishveshwara himself cutting a birthday cake. This was on his 60th birthday. This was on his 60th birthday. There was a special program that had been organized. It's called a Fest Shift, where scientists talk about the contribution of the person concerned, in this case Professor C.V. Vishveshwara, over the entire lifetime. And I had the opportunity to be around. He had kindly invited me to join, and on that day he also gave a talk on soap bubbles, which is still etched green in my mind. So this is part of that particular celebration, his 60th birthday. And on his birthday, he was also given an illustration. I would not call it a cartoon or anything like that. It's an illustration which actually captures all the important things that Professor C.V. Vishveshwara held dear to his heart. and all the things, major things that he achieved in his life, and some which he was destined to achieve. All those things have been captured in this wonderful illustration by Mr. Gujjar, B.G. Gujjarappa. And it was a bit of a very interesting coincidence that Professor C.V. Vishveshwara would make these kinds of uh, illustrations of illustrious scientists on various occasions using Mr. Gujjarappa's skills. He is a very well-known cartoonist. And it was nice to see that he was at the receiving end, in a literal sense, that he was gifted with a similar illustration which he made a trademark of his. And thanks to Professor Bala Iyer and Professor Saraswati Vishveshwara and many of the colleagues in the planetarium, we were all privy to this particular presentation, and he was thrilled, and he was actually in tears when he saw this wonderful illustration capturing his entire lifetime work. Because it is not very clear in the picture there, I would like to show you the actual one that was made by Mr. Gujjar. So there you see these musical notes, the tones. So Professor Vishveshwara is happily singing along his journey, and at the bottom you see base camp, black hole hunt. Black hole hunt was a program that actually involved 14 lectures by Professor Vishveshwara to undergraduate students in the planetarium, and these were very, very inspiring lectures, and many of the students they recall even to this day very fondly that they were part of these 14 lectures. And I will have the occasion to recall at least a few of those names towards the end of my presentation today. So that is a black hole hunt. Then there's a base camp. So base camp was one of the earliest programs that we started in the planetarium to be held during summer vacation. They were called base camp, and that is the reason why this particular hand post is there with those two. And Professor Bala Iyer left these 3 dots below deliberately, because he knew that there would be a lot more to be added to this list. And all the students and others who know about the planetarium educational activities today will vouch for the fact that Professor Iyer also made a mistake by having only 3 dots there. There should have been a number of dots, lot more than 3 there. So we have now evolved into a different educational institution, non-formal educational institution, but exactly on the lines that Professor Vishveshwara had thought of. And I'll have opportunity to introduce some of those at least towards the latter half of my presentation today. And then these are the other things that he worked on in his professional life. On black holes. Then black holes for bedtime is considered to be one of the best articles written in a semi-popular style, and it is very, very inspirational even to this day. And I remember reading somewhere Professor Bala Iyer's remark that when he was a very young person, he attended a conference which was hosted in PRL Ahmedabad, and this was one of the talks that Professor Vishveshwara gave. It was captioned "Black Hole for Bedtime," and Professor Bala Iyer says that that particular talk was the most inspiring incident that actually led him to a career in general theory of relativity and black hole physics. And today we all know the kind of pivotal role that Professor Bala Iyer has played in the detection of gravitational waves in the popular imagination, in the popular folklore. But other than that, Professor Bala Iyer has shaped himself into one of the greatest general relativists around. And the happy thing is that Professor C.V. Vishveshwara brought Professor Bala Iyer to planetarium to teach in the undergraduate programs. And a year later, he also brought Professor S. Lokanathan, one of the most brilliant teachers that I have ever come across in my life. In fact, anybody who has come across Professor Loknathan would say the same thing. Um, these two are also equally contributory work of Professor C.V. Vishveshwara, I think, because that has completely changed the way educational programs have happened in the past in the planetarium, and how their works, their style of working rubbed on each and every one of us and has enabled us to carry on in the direction that they have pointed out. So please do not mistake this to be some kind of an extolling of a or hero worship of somebody. They deserve every part of what I'm saying. It is from the bottom of my heart. I'm sorry if I'm making it a bit personal, but I can't help it because I have spent nearly 2.5 decades with them. So coming back to Professor C.V. Vishveshwara's work, so you have this cosmic picture book. Then he was extremely gifted at drawing cartoons, and he would make cartoons as illustrations, cartoons as comic relief in the midst of very serious scientific research. You know that general relativity or black hole physics or gravitational waves for that matter is really heavy stuff. It's really heavy stuff. I mean, gravity itself is it's a heavy stuff. Even in the literal sense, gravity literally means something that is heavy, right? So for somebody who is working for a lifetime in a field like gravity, it was very important that he would have some kind of a getaway from the serious research. But then he used his other talents like drawing cartoons to provide relief to himself and also to provide relief to a lot of others who found the subject a pretty heavy dose in the midst of a conference. We will have occasion to see some of those cartoons that Professor Vishveshwara himself made very shortly. Then you also have this undercover organization. So before you mistake, this UCO is ultra compact objects that he worked upon. So this UCO as an undercover organization is more on in a lighter vein. Then there is also the Schwarzschild stable and Kerr whirlpool. So these refer to the two kinds of black holes which are very popularly known to most of us. So Schwarzschild black holes, which are non-rotating black holes, and Kerr black holes, which are rotating black holes. And that stable, the word stable there is basically to highlight one of the most seminal works that Professor C.V. Vishveshwara did, which has left a deep imprint on black hole research in general over the last 5 decades or so. So I'll come to that in a short while. So this is a very brief discussion, a description of this particular illustration, and beautifully done by Mr. Gujar. This is an occasion to thank him also. So this is a picture of Professor C.V. Vishveshwara interacting at ICTS, International Center for Theoretical Sciences, in the wake of LIGO's detection of gravitational waves. So you saw one picture of Professor C.V. Vishveshwara, which was perhaps the last public appearance at MES College, and this is another one at ICTS. And he was, I could not be there in person, but I have seen the video recording of this. He was a very excited person. We have hardly seen him get excited about anything. Hardly get excited about anything. In fact, the first time I learned that his birthday was on March 6th, with a kind of a sense of discovery, I went to him. I told, "Sir, your birthday is coincident with the birthday of Michelangelo." Now, Michelangelo is a very well-known artist and somebody whom Professor Vishveshwara holds in very high regard. So I told him this, thinking that Professor Vishveshwara would be very happy at this coincidence. But immediately in his inimitable style, he said, "Madhusudhan, do you know that this is also the date on which a virus by the same name attacks computers all over the world?" So that was his way of making things a little down to earth, whenever you are excited. But even for a person of his of this stature, of this kind of an emotional stability, he was like a childlike. He showed a childlike exuberance and excitement when the first gravitational waves were directly detected. More of that a little later. So this is one of those occasions when Professor Vishveshwara was uh, very excited. So I showed you this earlier, and okay, now it is customary to introduce anybody with formal education that they had. So I'll do the same for, I'll complete the formality very quickly because we have a lot of nice, interesting things to go on later. So he did his schooling at a national school in Baswangudi, and his teacher, mentor, uh, was Professor H. Narsimaya, a very well-known teacher of physics who headed national education institutions and a rationalist. So Professor H. Narsimaya and Professor Vishveshwara had a long-lasting, friendly, um, friendly, friendly. What shall I say? Relationship with one another, which is very rarely seen between a teacher and a student. I have seen this from close quarters, how they would pull each one's legs, making fun of yeah, one another. So he had his schooling and college education at National College, and then he completed his BSc and MSc from the University of Mysore. Later, he went on for his post graduation to University of Maryland, and he did his PhD under Charles Misner. So again, like he had that friendly relationship with his teacher, mentor, guru here, Professor H. Narsimaya. I have heard a lot about from Professor Vishveshwara himself about his relationship with his PhD thesis advisor Charles Misner, and I don't remember exactly the occasion on which this illustration was made. This is again Professor C.V. Vishveshwara's gift to Charles Misner, uh, and thanks to Gujar who has made this under Professor Vishveshwara's instructions, which carries and also it captures all the essential features of Charles Misner's life. But we will have it for some other occasion. Today our point of focus is Professor Vishveshwara. So he did his PhD thesis, PhD under Charles Misner, and his PhD work turned out to be a very interesting one, where he works on the stability of what we call black holes now. Now, if you go back to the time when he did this work in the 1965, 66, around that time, or 68 maybe, 68 I think, black holes were still having their existence in mathematical equations. It was purely a theoretical conjecture. It was purely a mathematical construct. Whether black holes could exist as entities that could be tested, whose presence could be somehow detected, that was unclear. In fact, it was doubted. So when Professor Vishveshwara was asked to solve this particular problem on stability of black holes, Professor Vishveshwara has mentioned this in several of his articles, in his lectures, and also he has, in private conversations with us, he has also mentioned several times that suppose he had failed to solve this particular problem, he would have been the longest serving graduate student in University of Maryland, and that too without any funding. So that was that is the gravity of the problem itself. That is how difficult it was to solve. But fortunately, he showed that these black holes, once formed, can be stable, and that has come to be one of the most important contributions of Professor Vishveshwara to general relativity as well as black hole physics. You see, what is the point in having objects, entities that may be formed, but if their existence is for an extremely short duration, so small that your clocks would not register their presence at all, then what is the point in studying such objects? Anyway, they don't exist after a 1 millionth of a second or 1 billionth of a second, then there is no point in studying them. So that was one of the takes on why black holes should be studied or not studied. But thankfully, Professor Vishveshwara clearly showed that black holes once formed are stable. And once it was convinced to the black hole physics research community that these black holes can be stable, then there were more efforts and concerted efforts by the entire community to study more about black holes. Therefore, establishing the existence of something is important, but establishing the fact that these are stable, that means they exist for a duration long enough for you to test them, to study their properties, and to make further prediction about their behavior. That is the most beautiful thing in science, and Professor Vishveshwara's contribution in that sense is seminal. So this is one of the important contributions that he did to show that black holes are stable. But otherwise, and another thing that he worked on is very, very interesting. Suppose you have a black hole which is stable, but what if it is stable only unless it is perturbed? By perturbed, what we mean is, suppose this black hole interacts with some kind of a matter. So there could be matter falling from a neighboring star, or there could be radiation which is getting into the black hole. Suppose this radiation or infalling matter would somehow make this black hole unstable. Even then it would be very, very difficult to study. Of course, you can always say that the time duration over which the black hole would be unperturbed would be so long that you still have enough time to study that. But the important thing and the interesting thing to note is that if you have an isolated black hole somewhere in space, if there's an isolated black hole, when we say isolated black hole, what we mean is that it is not interacting with anything. So it is not doing anything to the radiation in its vicinity. It is not doing anything to any kind of matter in its vicinity. Then there is no way you can find out whether there is a black hole lurking out there in space or not. But the second work of Professor C.V. Vishveshwara showed that black holes can be perturbed, and when black holes get perturbed, what is it that happens? And the result is the production of what we now know as gravitational waves. And what these gravitational waves are and how they appear and how to detect them, this forms the next set of questions. And Professor Vishveshwara's role in that is again seminal. When I use the word seminal again and again, it is not because I have no choice of other words. It is because that is the only word which actually describes the path-breaking work that he came up with. So this is a cartoon that Professor Vishveshwara himself made, because I'm told that in academic circles, people who involve in black hole research, they jokingly use this phrase, what would happen if an ant sneezed in the vicinity of a black hole? So would the black hole be perturbed by the sneezing of an ant? This is just to show metaphorically that ant being such a small entity, small object, and the sneezing of a ant would be so irrelevant to you and me in our daily life, whether that would make a difference to black hole at all or not. So this is the thing that he came up with. So what you see is that there is a black hole there, and the black hole has been perturbed by the sneezing of an ant, and in retaliation or maybe in reaction, black hole is actually sending out some kind of a radiation in the direction of ant. Okay, so the moral of the story of this illustration is that a perturbed black hole would actually do something. Something. Excuse me, can you please mute yourself? Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so this ant sneezing as a metaphor tells you that even a small kind of perturbation of a black hole would actually result in some reaction by the black hole, and this kind of radiation would be given out by a black hole, and that is what we call gravitational waves. Now, it is one thing to know that if you perturb a black hole, some kind of a radiation would be given out, some kind of a gravitational wave would be given out. But then how do you detect the gravitational wave? See, you are not able to see the black hole in the first place. That itself is a big problem. And if it's an isolated one, there is no way we can find out. But if there is by chance some kind of an interaction between a black hole and something else, maybe another black hole or another neutron star or some such material object, then he showed, Professor Vishveshwara showed clearly what the signature of this radiation would be. It's one thing to say that radiation will be given out, but if you have to make a detector and if you have to detect it directly, then you should know what you are going to detect. All right. So it is like you go to an airport to receive a guest. The guest has not seen you and you have not seen the guest. So what is the way you communicate to one another? You hold a placard saying that I'm waiting for you out here. So you write down your name or you write down the name of the guest. So that is the way you communicate, right? So there has to be some kind of a communication. So that placard tells you the identity of the person. Now, what is the identity of this gravitational wave? What does it look like? So, or in other words, Professor C.V. Vishveshwara's work on gravitational wave in 1970 clearly showed what the placard gravitational wave would be carrying. And then, once you know what you have to detect, the next step becomes relatively easy. I don't say it's very easy, because even from that point it has taken almost 45 years for people to detect gravitational waves by direct means. So that is the nature of that's the level of difficulty of the problem that they were working on. So two important ideas: one, stability of a black hole, and the other one, the signature of a gravitational wave. Both are related to one another actually. And at this point I would like to tell you that Professor Vishveshwara had a deep sense of making connections within the subject and across the disciplines. And perhaps this way of thinking coherently about different things, where many people would not see a connection, he would see a connection. That kind of personality is something which I came to appreciate enormously during these 25 years. And it is the same kind of connectivity that you have this gravitational wave research and you have the black hole research. Looks like the two are different, but then he connected them through two of his papers, both of which have played a key role in the last 50 years. So this is just to break the monotony of just cartoons, caricatures, illustrations, black and white. So this is a colorful artist impression. So if there is a black hole and it is interacting with a neighboring star, interacting is a very common English word. What it means is that it is taking matter from the neighboring star through gravitational interaction, and in the process the material gets heated up, and as it comes closer and closer to the black hole, and that would result in the heating up of the matter and producing jets that you see on above and below. I mean, above and below is just for our reference. In space there is nothing to separate these two. Therefore, this is an artist's impression of Cygnus X1. In fact, that was the first black hole candidate that people worked upon. So that's the reason why I chose this particular illustration. And another thing that Professor Vishveshwara's work very clearly showed was that, okay, you have shown that black holes can be formed under certain conditions, maybe collapsing of a massive star or by other means. Having done that, he showed these black holes once formed can be there for eternity. And then he showed, very importantly, that when they are perturbed, these radiation would be given out by them in some form. And the other thing is, once you know that there is something like a black hole, you need to characterize them. You need to you need to list out the properties that they have, because you will be making all the studies on the basis of these characteristics that they have. So he clearly showed that a black hole derives its complete description from its mass. Okay, and this property, where a black hole is completely described by its mass, is known as a no hair theorem. It's no hair theorem, and scientists have very interesting ways of coming up with these lighter in a lighter way in certain terms. So there's a no hair theorem. So which means that there is no other information that you have about black holes other than mass, which means all the things that you need to know about them is through their mass. That is what this implies. This is actually a principle of parsimony, some kind of a stingy operation that nature does all the time, that it tries to minimize in one way or the other some physical parameter like mass or energy and things like that. So when you have several competing ideas, you choose the simplest one to explain. So in this particular case, this parsimony, the principle of parsimony, relates to describing a black hole, maybe with a number of different features, but when all the features can be explained through one feature, namely its mass, then why do you need many others? So that is the reason why this is called a black hole. Black holes have no hair, or popularly known as a no hair theorem. All right. So that is again Professor Vishveshwara's cartoon illustration that he made at the Einstein Centenary Symposium, which was held in Ahmedabad. So he had this beautiful way of enlivening a serious scientific research being communicated, interspersed with these illustrations, which on the face of it look like they are funny, but they are not funny. If you look at them, they contain loads and loads of serious information that you can decipher from these illustrations. Now this was his way of describing a black hole. So while black holes are in textbooks described in many ways, like a black hole is an object or an entity whose escape velocity is so high that even light cannot escape and things like that. But I would always say that the simplest way to say is the following, that it is some kind of a one-way wavefront, a black hole. So if an observer, so observer doesn't mean a person in flesh and blood like you see here. An observer can be a piece of matter of any kind, living or non-living, or it could be some kind of radiation, photons. So once you cross that wavefront, there is no way of crossing it over once again. So that is what he would always describe a black hole as, and that was the most convincing description of a black hole, I think. So this is just to summarize. I think I'm running out of time, so I should now go at the speed of light, or nearly at the speed of light. Oh, he had a caricature even for that. There was a lady who, I don't have that caricature cartoon here in my presentation, so I have to describe to you. So there is this lady who is supposed to come at a particular time, maybe for a conference or a meeting. So she ends up coming very late when the meeting is all over and people are winding up, packing up things and ready to leave the meeting hall. So she says, it was not my mistake. I actually wanted to come to this meeting in a hurry. Therefore, I traveled at the speed of light, and in the process, I took infinitely long time, or maybe a large amount of time, and that's the reason why I am late. So he's trying to explain the time dilation factor, as you increase the speed at which an object moves through that wonderful cartoon. So it is on the face of it a cartoon, a lighter the lighter side of science, but actually it is telling you something very seriously camouflaged or sweet coated with those cartoons. So this is his. I'll come back to this quasi-normal mode in a short while. Okay, so I have to move at the speed of light, like I told you. So which means that I'll take a lot more time than my scheduled time to complete the talk presentation. So this is a photograph of the announcement of the first direct detection of gravitational waves by LIGO. This happened on the 11th of February. So the anniversary was celebrated less than a month ago, and Professor Vishveshwara was unable to be present there in person. So he was there in Ayuka, and he told me that he had no inkling of what kind of an announcement would be made and why Ayuka people in Pune wanted him to be present for that at that particular moment. But he had a kind of a guess that something big, something related to his work could be there, because of which he is being invited, and they made sure that he would be there. And so this is the announcement, and the announcement was about LIGO, laser interferometric gravitational wave observatory, one in Hanford and the other in Livingston. They had detected gravitational waves directly for the first time uh, in the month of September the previous year. So September, October, November, December, January, about 5 months before that announcement. And the joy that Professor Vishveshwara had on this was, I mean, it did not escape anybody's attention, because everybody have known that he was, even when he was very ecstatic, it would not be more than a large smile, but he was laughing from ear to ear. He was smiling from ear to ear, having a large grin, because it was not because gravitational waves had been discovered. That anyway was a very important discovery, but what went into this discovery was the signature of gravitational wave. When detected, Professor Vishveshwara had worked out in the year 1970 itself. So that you see on the left hand side of your screen. So this is a signature of a gravitational wave that would be produced by a black hole that has been perturbed, perhaps by another black hole. And all the algorithms that went into detecting gravitational waves in the LIGO observatory, you know, it would be humanly impossible to detect gravitational waves by somebody sitting in front of a computer screen, looking at the waveform passing by on the screen, and then pointing out, lo and behold, look at a gravitational wave there. There's no way of doing that, because this gravitational wave signal would be swamped by, it would be immersed in an ocean of noise. There would be so much of other kinds of signals with which this gravitational wave would be mixed up. So it is like finding the proverbial needle in a haystack. But then, if you know what the needle looks like, and uh, that would make your search that much easier, because you know what the needle looks like. If you don't know what the needle looks like, and then if you are told look for a search for a needle in the haystack, it would be an impossible problem to solve. So Vishveshwara showed what the needle looks like, and when they were detected, there was an unmistakable resemblance to the signature that Professor Vishveshwara had done it. And what is interesting is, way back in 1970, when still using computers for this kind of calculations was a fancy, Professor Vishveshwara would very proudly tell that he wrote a Fortran program which actually computed this graph that you see on the left hand side of the screen. And then he would say, look Madhusudhan, today you just put something into a pen drive, and then out comes the output. It happens in a matter of a minute or so. And he would say the kind of data that he worked in 1970 for that computer, if the same data had to be done by a simple laptop or a PC sitting here, it wouldn't take more than a few minutes. But then he had to make this in a punched card, a bunch of them, huge bunch, and then hand it over there, and then collect it the next day or the day after that. And then if you find that there is one small bug in the program, then you have to do all over again, and then stand in the queue, and then go to the computer's facility and hand over this bunch. So he was very, very proud about the fact that He did all this at a time when computers themselves were in a primitive stage, and what those computers produced is unmistakably what today's computers have detected. Okay, so this is short of the long story that his work has on gravitational wave research. So now I have to quickly get into this remaining part, which is his style of communicating research, his style of communicating anything to do with science or anything in general, which need not be science. Even a casual conversation with Professor Vishveshwara would immediately tell you his way of thinking, his way of expressing something. There was nothing like an uncertainty in things that he told, and whatever he told with certainty, while it was very firm and no nonsense, it was always laced with wit, humor, some anecdotes, some stories, and then it was always a joy to listen to him because of the literary richness um, that he had in his communication, and most of all that I have come to appreciate, connecting ideas across disciplines, across topics. So, in fact, one of the last slides that I prepared for his talks on general relativity, he told me about an article. I must apologize because after that I have not visited this article, nor have made attempt to search for it. Maybe I should do it after today's talk. He talks about somebody's work which shows that within our body there are geodesics in the way the muscles are actually arranged. So this was for a talk at NIAS that he was going to give. Uh, he mentioned about it, but we were not able to get some literature on that. So he was always trying to connect this. So not many people would be really interested whether there is a geodesy in the body or outside on the road and things like that. But he was always trying to make connections which would make the central idea that he was trying to tell more receptive by the audience. So that is one of the important things, that we connect ideas. Now I shall give you a bird's eye view of some of the through some of the illustrations that he prepared to support my point as to what kind of a person he was when he communicated science and other things. So here is an astrologer sitting there. So he says futuristic astrology, and then look at the tongue-in-cheek. Instead of probabilities, he says improbabilities in the bracket, and then of quantum gravity included. He says even that is also included in his predictions, and he says effects of gravitational radiation from planets taken into account. So for that there is extra charge. So while all these things look a bit funny, and they are funny really, but they don't end at that. That is more important for us. Importantly, he was actually trying to talk about the various kinds of the present researches that are going on, and then relate it to a situation which we would not normally relate, and the funny part actually arises from that connection. I mean, who would try to connect gravitational radiation from planets to astrology? But we know immediately that this astrology is based on planetary positions. That's what astrologers do, and the fact that he integrated that with a wonderful part of science, that's very, very interesting. Look at this about dark matter. So there is a vegetable seller, and the two customers are talking to themselves. He says he can't help it because it is part of the missing mass in the universe. So that was the time when people were talking about missing mass in the universe, the dark matter, and so on. And he comes up with this kind of a very interesting situation, which we all relate. You know, we are most of the times unhappy when somebody weighs on a double pan balance like that, and we always have this in the back of our mind that maybe that 1 kg weight is not exactly 1 kg. It may be slightly less than that missing mass. So this is a nice way of showing that. So that was him. And look at this. This was before gravitational waves were directly detected. He was very good at making these acronyms. Look at this. Groans. Something very painful. It stands for Gedanken Radiation Observations. analysis, numerical solutions. And then he says the motto is where there is a will, there is a wave. See how he plays around with these words which are very familiar to us, but a small tweak in that, it gives you a completely different feel. And he would actually make anybody a butt of his funny illustrations. And in this, he made himself. So this is Professor Vishveshwara himself, a self-portrait, if you can call it. And see what he says. I have a grant, therefore it must exist. So he's talking about this gravitational radiation. So people who are into serious research, they would appreciate these things far better than normal people like me. Okay. So this is another one on dark matter. So people are so excited and so desperate. They're so desperate to find the dark matter that this man in an observatory has forgotten to open the dome. So all that the telescope is seeing is a closed one. So the professor says you have forgotten to open the dome. So that is throwing cold water on this man's excitement. Now this is something which I have thoroughly enjoyed. I cannot stop myself from laughing. Of course, today, because I am on a public platform, I have to hold myself back. But every single time I have seen this in my book, I have laughed heartily at this. The professor is saying, in order to explain the unobserved dark matter, unobserved dark energy, unobservable extra dimensions, and unobservable bubble universes, I have derived an invisible equation. So the blackboard is empty there. Now, what a wonderful way of putting this. That it was him at his best. So you can see his signature, Vishu. So that was how he was very popularly known among his research mates. Okay, so this is another one. So there, it's a dark room, and then somebody is saying we are in the dark, and somebody says, dark matter, dark energy. So this is what they are interpreting about the darkness there in the room. And then somebody, a very wise person, saying, so are the cosmologists. So because they don't know much about dark energy, dark matter, so this is even the cosmologists are in the dark. And here is a small spoof that he does. This is a very famous line from New Genesis that he took, and only he could make this kind of transformation and give it a comical twist. So in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. But the devil said, no, let there be dark, and there was dark. So that is how he put it. And then he would also have stories like this, which enlivened conferences. So there was this gravitational IAGRG conference in Goa. So he was trying to make a case why it was Newton who first came up with the theory of gravitation, and why not somebody from India. And then he chose an astronomer, a non-existent astronomer from ancient times from the land of coconuts, Kerala. And then he says that like Newton was sitting and contemplating under an apple tree, because there are no apple trees in Kerala. So this gentleman was sitting under a coconut tree, and he would leave at that, People would really split into laughter, and he would have a dead serious face, because people know what was coming next. He didn't have to tell them. And the best part of his jokes, or best part of his humor, were the last few words or a sentence which he would leave unsaid, that had lot more power, lot more impact than if he had actually told those things. So I leave it to you with in the same spirit. So this is a cartoon made by him about a Kerala astronomer who discovered the law of gravitation long before Newton did. And then he would say, this is the first case of somebody perishing before publishing. That was an icing on the cake. Okay. So when people talked about black hole thermodynamics, he came up with something from Macbeth, bubble, toil and trouble. So we know this particular episode. So like witches going around, the the pot where they're making a magical concoction. So there is that black hole being heated up in a vessel, and these are all witches, and they're dancing there. And though these are all very musical words that he has used, these are all technically correct ones, like the G mu nu, T mu nu, and then PDV for thermodynamic expressions, and TDS, all these things. So this is how he was, a person laced with wit and humor. I think I'm running short of time, and there are too many of these, therefore I will skip one or two of these. I hope you don't mind. And if this is being recorded and it will be made available later on YouTube, you can freeze.
Sir, you can take extra time if you want.
Who is this?
Sir, I'm Anmol.
Anmol, okay. Uh, all right, but in the spirit of way the Professor Vishveshwara would do, when you talk, when he's asked to give a talk for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, you fix the time. He would on the dot complete the talk. You could actually set your clock by the time he started, by the time he stopped. Okay, I have done only half of that. I started on time, but I don't know if I will be finishing it on time like he would always do. But I don't think he would really be very much worried now if I took a few extra minutes. But it won't be too much. Okay. And he had this witty way of making simple objects being described in a bombastic scientific language. You would think that he's saying something very, very profound, and then he would drop you down and make you feel feel really sheepish sometimes. Oh, this is what he was referring to. Look at this. He says vibroacoustic dual pronged dipole antenna. He is referring to a tuning fork which this detective is holding in his hand. This is a beautiful, scientifically correct way of telling what a tuning fork is, but in a language that makes it very, very bombastic. Now, and the other one, he's holding a magnifying glass, says high ratio optical amplitude amplification scrutinizer, where he could have just said magnifying glass. So if you know his persona, his personality, and you know what was in store whenever he made this kind of a presentation, I can tell you that the moment you see this kind of a cartoon being flashed there, you know that he's going to pull somebody's leg in his scientific circles. He would be making fun of somebody's work, of course, in a lighter vein. He took everybody's work very seriously. He would make fun for that moment, the lighter side. So this was him, a gravitational wave detective. And look at this spoof. This is a spoof on René Descartes, one of the greatest mathematicians and philosophers. René Descartes' famous epitaph is that I think, therefore I am. Okay, I think, therefore I am. So he plays on that. He says, I think it exists, therefore I am. I think I am, therefore it exists. It exists, therefore I think. That is only he can do that. What if it does not exist? Therefore I am not. So he's also giving the contrary to something not existing. So this is a spoof on René Descartes' famous words, I think, therefore I am. So this is also an opportunity for me to tell you that Professor Vishveshwara was such a widely read person. All his wisdom, all his connectivity among different disciplines came not overnight just like that. He was an extremely well-read person, and his interests were very, very varied. In fact, that would be wider than the electromagnetic spectrum that you would see. So there would be philosophy, there would be religion, there would be language, then there would be science, and there would be history. You name any aspect of human knowledge domain, he would be interested, and he would. And again, he was not just a cursory reader of these things. He absorbed all the nice things from all these experiences and that reflected in every sphere of activity that he took up. Okay, so if he is making a spoof on Rene Descartes, you can be sure that he has read and understood Rene Descartes' philosophy in and out. So that was him. Okay, and now I come to his other aspects and other facets quickly. I've been telling quickly, but I have run out of time. But maybe, like Anmol said, I'll take a few minutes more. Um, the face of truth is hidden by the golden orb of the sun, that attractive orb of thine. O sun, please remove, so that I may see the truth. I mean, this is how the first planetarium program that he scripted here in the planetarium, called Our Sun and His Family. This is how the planetarium show began. Okay, or maybe in the early part of the program itself. And it is such a important and a relevant thing. As long as the sun is shining bright in the sky, you don't even know the existence of a multitude of stars that are there, millions of other objects, at least thousands to the naked eye, that are there. There may be comets once in a while. All these truth would be hidden from you if the sky is illuminated by this sun. So he's Ishopanishad, quoting Ishopanishad, he says, "O sun, please remove, please go away, so that I may see the truth." So the existence of the sun alone is not the entire truth about the universe. There is something far more things which are hidden than being shown by the presence of the sun. So this is what Vishveshwara used in his program, and since then it has become some kind of a template for all of us. Wherever possible, we try to use these philosophies, mythologies, and integrate that with the science, not merely as a relief to the people who come to the planetarium show, but also to show how there are different ways of thinking about the same phenomenon. Okay, so I quickly go through some of these. I told you about his well-read character, which characterized him, while the object that Professor Vishveshwara studied, the black hole, was characterized by just mass. Of course, there could be charge and angular momentum, as we know now. Just three things which completely describe a black hole. But the person, one of the key persons who studied it, he was a multifaceted person, Professor Vishveshwara. So he was characterized by a number of things, and these are some of the things that I'm telling you. So this is from literature, from Julius Caesar. And again, he did not go to internet to find out, give me a quotation from Julius Caesar about astronomy, give me a quotation from Julius Caesar about stars. That was not how he was. That's what I meant by telling you that when he quoted something, he would know in and out of that. If he is quoting from Ishopanishad, even if he was going to use just that paragraph, he would be completely thorough with the entire Ishopanishad. That was him. Okay, and similarly, when you say a quotation from William Shakespeare, he would have read all the works of Shakespeare. Or there's a quotation from Alice in Wonderland, he would have read everything that Lewis Carroll had written. And that is how he could borrow from each of these in his presentations and make them really very lively. So, this is from King Lear. So he talks about superstitious beliefs. He said, "This is an excellent foppery of the world that when we are sick in fortune, we make guilty of our disasters the sun, the moon, and stars, as if we were villains by necessity, fools by heavenly compulsions, knaves, thieves, and treachers by spherical predominance, drunkards, liars, and adulterers by an enforced obedience of planetary influence, and all that we are evil in by a divine thrusting on." So when we do something wrong, we always say that this is because of some divine compulsions. And here he's taking a dig at people who go under this umbrage. They take shelter under divine things when actually they are responsible for what they have done. And instead of he telling in so many words like I'm explaining to you, he would just have this wonderful quotation injected at the right moment in his talk, and that would leave a lasting impact on everybody in the audience, and that includes me also. Then I come to the last part, See the part where I should have spent more time. Unfortunately, I'll have to curtail a little bit and then just give you a glimpse of what is happening. For two reasons. One, as an afterthought, I feel that now the planetarium and planetarium activities are pretty well known to people. So you would excuse me if I left out a few of the details that you already know. But then this is in the context of how Professor Vishveshwara conceptualized an educational program in the planetarium, how he gave wings to those ideas. And today, if we are flying high and you are having this wonderful bird's eye view of the Nehru Planetarium, metaphorically, this is only because of all the thoughts that went into his work. So you'll find these artistic exhibits in the planetarium. When you come, you're greeted by this. So he had a talk with artists about cosmology, and then he let the artists actually come up with their imagination and then prepare artistic exhibits as they thought, as they understood, as they appreciated cosmos. And this is one such thing. So he could actually talk his science, cosmology, to anybody at any level. That's a gift not many of us really have. Not merely about cosmos, whatever our subject of specialization. It's very hard to convince in a simpler language to everyone. But he was one such rare breed who could talk cosmology to artists, to poets, and to painters, anybody from any walk of life, and make them understand. That's the most important part. So these are all the planetarium shows that he scripted, and like I told you, this mythology and other stories became an integral part of our planetarium shows. And then he would actually take enormous interest in getting these artworks created. This is by one of the proficient and well-known international artist, our own Chandranath Acharya. Just like Mr. Gujarappa I mentioned to you earlier, Chandranath Acharya also is a person from Karnataka, and he makes such wonderful paintings for the planetarium shows. This is about Orion, very colorful. In fact, this visual is not doing full justice to the richness that you would see in the planetarium dome. Maybe next time we have this, you should come and watch this. So these are all the planetarium shows that he was instrumental in, which he scripted, directed. And directing a planetarium show involves not only compiling interesting scientific facts at a level that general public would appreciate, and also he decided what the general public should appreciate. So he would not tone down something because it was difficult for general public to understand. He had this uncanny knack of first deciding this is what the general public should know, and then he would go about finding what is the best way to tell them this, even though it is very, very difficult. So these are all the different ways of expressions that he would use. Okay, then the cartoons. This is a wonderful painting by Mr. Chandranath Acharya, Gangavatharana, when he talks about Milky Way galaxy, and it narrates the story of Gangavatharana, how it was brought down to earth by Bhagiratha. That whole mood is so beautifully encapsulated in this painting. And he did not end there. When it came to composing music for the planetarium shows, he had enormous knowledge of music, and he would tell exactly what instruments to be used and what kind of a tone, and then in which raga one had to play. He was very clear about what he wanted, and he would get them from whether it was artist like Chandranath Acharya, Gujarappa, or Chandranath Acharya, or Ravi Shenoy, who composed music for all the programs that Professor Vishveshwara scripted. In every dimension, he was well versed. Okay, so this was it was a unique program that we had called Swaraspandana under the Sky Theatre. It was done in order to usher in the new millennium from 1999 December 31st to 2000 January 1st. In the midnight, we had this wonderful program called Swaraspandana, where music was played under the artificial skies of the planetarium. It was an exhilarating experience actually. Um, Today, as a mark of his birthday, we had an online version of Science in Action science exhibition. And this is a program that he conceptualized. He conceptualized around 1992. That was the first time we had science in action. Science in action. He would always tell me to be careful when I use this. Don't say science in action. It is science in action. So there should be a pause. So science in action. So it's a poetic justice that we had one edition of that today morning on his birthday. So he started this, and a number of people would not associate him with experiments because he was a theoretical physicist. He would work out equations on a piece of paper about what the black hole would do next. But for a theoretical scientist of his stature, his interest in experiment was really, to borrow the present generation expression of happiness, was awesome. It was mind blowing. Okay, and for a theoretical physicist to be so much interested deeply in science, experimental science, is a very rare thing. And he was very clear about this. He would say, I took to the theoretical physics out of my interest because my interest lay there and I'm gifted in that. But then science is not just theory. Science is all about experiments. So children, he would say, even up to undergraduate level, should never ever make the mistake of branding themselves as theoretical scientists or experimental scientists. He would say, at least up to your post graduation, you must do both theory and experiments. Then by the time you come to PhD, then you know where your real interest lies. And incidentally, I mean, you can see that this photograph is from our archives and from very old times. The person who is nearest to you on the screen, left-hand side, is the present director, Mr. Pramod Galgali. So this is how young he was. So next time you come to Planetarium, you can have a look at him now. And that is how old our Science in Action is. Maybe a little older than that because this is not the first Science in Action photograph. Okay, so he thought about this outdoor science park exhibit, and people who have come to Planetarium must have played around with the exhibits and maybe broken some of them, maybe out of ignorance or maybe inadvertently. But then this science park was his concept again of popularizing science. He felt that when people come to Planetarium, they should have some space where they can leisurely spend and at the same time be educated. So science park is one such. Then all these educational programs, like I told you, he was very good at giving those acronyms. So the SEED, science education in early development for young children like this. Today, some of you might have participated in a program called Tiny Tots. So the SEED is actually the head under which Tiny Tots is done. So there you have a tree with fruits. So those fruits are all the children who would be graduating out of Planetarium through their educational programs. Okay, so this is SEED. And then we had a program called SO, Science on Weekends or Science over Weekends for high school children, slightly grown up beyond Tiny Tots. Oh, I just now noticing there is this girl in yellow t-shirt, yellow top. Her name is Ramya. She had come to Planetarium classes long ago, and this is through one such session when Professor Aditya from IISc, he had actually brought a human brain and he sliced these human brain and he would explain to children from close quarters. You can see their excitement there, how the different parts of the brain actually function. This is science in action. This is a kind of educational experience that we give at the Planetarium. And Professor Vishveshwara was very particular that this is how science should be taught and learned. So this is Science over Weekend, so SOW. And then going further, we have now a program called REAP, REAP for undergraduate students, Research Education Advancement Program. It started with physical sciences, with physics, and now it has branched out and it has a sibling called BioReap with a similar program in biology or life sciences. So the tree which he planted with the seed, with a seed that he had sown, today has reaped um, benefits. Society has reaped benefits. It's not planetarium. It is not people who taught here who have reaped the benefits. It is the society at large which is reaping benefits, because these people have now gone into various research institutions. They have become they have become scientists of stature in their own chosen field of research, and they have, some of them have come back to teach in REAP, where they once upon a time were taught and mentored here. So one full cycle has gone. You see, you sow the seed and then there's a sapling, it becomes a tree, and then it fruits, and the fruits produce seeds, and again it's another cycle. So now we are in the second cycle now, where the REAP students have become faculty in the planetarium to teach in these programs. And this is what he had to say about the planetarium activities. There is the base, Bangalore Association for Science Education. So that is at the base. Then we have popularization programs like exhibitions, summer programs, and so on. Then we have workshops and other kinds of exhibitions, which are slightly at a higher level. Then the education programs like Seed, Sow, and Reap. And look at how this is a slide I have borrowed from his own presentation about planetarium activities, which he once delivered at Indian Institute of Science. So I just borrowed that slide from his presentation. Beautiful quotation. But a man's reach should exceed his grasp, or what is a heaven for? So if you just did things that you can handle easily, that is not good enough. What he says is, you should always try to reach something that is slightly beyond your reach, slightly beyond your grasp. And when you achieve that, then that is an achievement. So that's the kind of, I mean, he was very, very good at using these quotations, and these quotations have this habit of impressing you, impacting you 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times more than giving a big lecture on why you should be attempting to do something beyond your grasp. Just one quotation. So this is, in a nutshell, the kind of people who came to planetarium when he was around. There was this Professor David Malin, whose photographs we have used for a very long time. The largest prints of David Malin's photographs, Sir David Malin's photographs, were in our planetarium, he would say. Then there's Professor Raja Ramanna, then Minister Ghorpade sir, then Professor Padmanabhan, then Professor H. Narasimhaya, with that Gandhi topi, you cannot mistake him at all. So that was the kind of relationship between Guru and student that I told you, Guru Shishya Parampare, of a different kind. And like all good things, they say, come to an end. His end, in a way, in a metaphor, in a very figurative way, came on the 16th of January 2017. And the Facebook was agog with messages about Professor Vishveshwara, which all indicated how much they loved him and how much they were actually influenced by his thoughts, by his subject, and so on. So this particular Facebook, this is an inadvertent thing actually. I did not mean to have this. This was not by choice. It is more like, I would say, divine providence in one of those quotations. That I have taken a Facebook post which was posted by Vijay Kumar Krishnamurthy. He was a REAP student here in the planetarium, and I must tell you this story, otherwise I would be doing injustice to Professor Vishveshwara and REAP both. There was a time when there were not many students attending this REAP program, and Professor Vishveshwara was a bit saddened that there are just 2 students, and if people don't want, why should we continue with this? So he told Professor Bala here, a very close friend of Professor Vishveshwara and a collaborator in his research, and Professor Iyer. Professor Iyer is now associated with all the educational programs, and he mentors all of us. Um, so Professor Iyer told, as though in with some kind of a futuristic prediction, he said, if these two students are going to be in my class, I don't mind teaching them the whole year. And Vijay Kumar was one of them, and the other person was Ashish Pancholi, and both of them were from MES College. So MES College and Planetarium and REAP has some connection, strange connection. Earlier I told you about Professor Vishveshwara's last public appearance being at MES College, and Vijay Kumar Krishnamurthy went on to become an established scientist, and now he works as a faculty in ICTS, and he is a core teacher of the REAP faculty here. And the other thing I noticed is the following, which again tells you something about Professor Vishveshwara's wide range of interests that I mentioned. This is a post by this girl Padmaleka, who is one of our earliest REAP students, maybe the first batch, if I remember right. She is now in Germany after completing her PhD in low temperature physics, I think. So she had this post on the day Professor Vishveshwara passed away. She says, "Sir, yesterday we watched this movie, To Kill a Mockingbird, in honor of CVV's memory. In honor of CVV's memory, I know it was one of his favorites. I remember watching that movie 2 times at JNP premises." So Professor Vishveshwara did not just advocate about only doing science. Like I told you, he had multifarious interests, and in each and every one of them, his interest was very deep. It was not at all superficial. So he was also greatly interested in movies. He had a fantastic taste for good movies, and for a short time we had this screening of classic movies, and To Kill a Mockingbird was one of them. And this girl remembers that from 20 years ago, and she posts saying that she remembered this particular thing, and she watched that movie in honor of CVP. Now, what can be a bigger tribute by a student to a teacher than this? Okay, so I finally end with this wonderful pencil sketch by another student of REAP by name Madhuri. This girl she's an engineer. She didn't get into scientific research, but then she works for a company which is involved in making certain electronic sensors, and she says that all the training she got in physics, mathematics, and logical thinking through REAP program and through interaction with people like Professor Vishveshwara, Professor Bala Iyer, Professor Loknathan, who taught her during REAP days, she says all of them have never gone waste. So this is another thing. So if you do REAP, you don't have to be in physics, you don't have to be in astrophysics, you can be doing art, but that logical thinking, that way of thinking will make you a better artist than somebody else who has not come to REAP. So this is an indirect advertisement, I hope you don't mind. Look at this beautiful presentation. She has captured all the key ideas that Professor Vishveshwara worked on in the context of black holes, and this was a moving tribute by a student to a teacher. And I said finally end, and I'm breaking my word. I finally end with this particular slide. Huh?
Meeting may have closed. Finish.
Okay. So I end with this particular slide. This was sent to me by one of our REAP students. He noticed this car with the registration number. This is in the US with the registration number CVV 001. What a wonderful combination. CVV for C.V. Vishveshwara and 001. I need not tell you what it would stand for. This is Gautam on the right hand side, and he says in his message, as I got done with a cross-country ski training session in my town, I noticed this car's license plate. Given that it was a day or so before CVV's birthday. See, this boy remembers CVV's birthday, and he did REAP in 1999-2000. It brought back a lot of fond memories. So this is the kind of footprints or imprints that we leave in the sands of time on young, plasticine, moldable clay minds. Clay minds not in the normal sense that people use. Clay as something that is deformable. You can make it into any shape that you like. So education has this kind of an impact, and Professor Vishveshwara was very, very clear about this. So you do education, do it the right way, or you don't do it, because it is concerning somebody's life. So like I told you, to wind up this, the impact of educational programs at the planetarium have not been at the individual level. We didn't produce students who became very good students and then they became very rich and famous. We have produced students, I can tell you very proudly, who are giving back to the society in larger measure than what they got from it. So this attitude of making the whole scientific work a societal uh, obligation, it forms the heart of the educational programs of the planetarium. And these were sown, nurtured, and nourished by Professor Vishveshwara long back. And now we are seeing the fruits of all that. Uh, so this is why I said that he may not be here in physical form, but in spirit and soul, uh, his way of doing things continue. And all the people who worked on research with him have similar things to say. So with this I end. If there are questions and there is time, I would like to take up. This would be the end slide of Professor Vishveshwara every time he gave a PowerPoint presentation. So I'm just borrowing once again from his. That's all, folks. Till our world lines converge again, till we meet again in a common platform at the same time.